For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, "Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you."
It was the feast of Sukkot in Jerusalem. The Feast of Booths, they call it. Thousands of people were there in celebration. They would come every year for this feast. It was a celebration of the Exodus from Egypt, but it was also a celebration of the harvest. It was the last day of the feast. And like other days, like the other 7 days, the other 6 days of this week-long feast, the priests had gone all the way down to the pool of Siloam. Now, if you've been to Jerusalem, and probably many of you have not been to Jerusalem, it's actually really surprising because Siloam is way down here, and there's a road straight up to the Temple Mount, but it's steep and it's straight uphill. And they would gather water in the pool of Siloam, and they would process up in the evening hours. And they would get up there. The ultimate goal was that the men and the boys would go into the court of the priests, and they would pour it into the silver receptacles around the altar, and it would become a drink offering or a liquid offering. But in the process, they would go through the court of the women. And there were these menorahs that had come from the intertestamental period. It's where Hanukkah comes from. But they put up these 4 giant menorahs. And you could see the light of the menorahs in every home in Jerusalem. That's how bright it was. And on that last day, Jesus walks into the temple. And he declares, "I am the light of the world." Little did they know that one of their sayings, when they would sing Psalm 118, one of their sayings during that time was, "Our ancestors turned their backs on the temple of the Lord, but our eyes are on the Lord." Little did they know that he was right there. And they didn't recognize him. How about you? Have you seen Jesus? Is he the light in your world? Frederick Buechner, writer and preacher, said this: "If there is a terror about darkness because we cannot see, there is also a terror about light because we can see. There is a terror about light because much of what we see in the light about ourselves and our world, we would rather not see, or would rather not have be seen." So what we have in our passage here this morning is a call to walk in the light and not to walk in darkness. And so I just want to look at those 2 things this morning. Number 1, darkness really does exist. And number 2, why walking in the light is a lot better. So number 1, darkness really does exist. And number 2, why walking in the light is better. So number 1, darkness really does exist. Paul makes one mention of light back in chapter 3, but now he leans into it as a full-blown metaphor. Verse 8, "For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light." So what does that mean? Well, it means that there is light, and yes, that there is darkness. There is darkness. So let's first talk about what it doesn't mean, okay? What it doesn't mean. This is not Star Wars. This is not a force in the universe where everything collects together and it's one giant force in the universe, and the bright side, the light side, and the dark side are trying to harness the force for their side, push it one side or the other. This is very popular. Star Wars is a poster child for Buddhism. This is what Buddhism teaches. It is a poster child for Buddhism. That is not the light and dark that's being talked about here. What the Bible talks about as light and darkness is much different. So the Bible says that there is only one true force in the universe, and that is Almighty God, the creator and sustainer of all that is, who not only is completely sovereign with all power, but he is completely and wholly good. There is no darkness in him whatsoever. And you may go, then why do we have darkness? Well, he created man and woman in his own image and gave them the ability to obey or to disobey, and they disobeyed, and darkness flooded mankind. Of course, it had already happened in heaven. Satan had already been cast out because he had already disobeyed. Darkness was already there. So was all of this darkness beyond God's power? Well, no. But for his reasons, which we actually don't really understand. But here's the thing, just because you can't think of a good reason why evil exists doesn't mean there isn't one, right? We can't be arrogant enough to say, well, since I can't think of a good reason why evil exists, then there must not be a God or something like that. I'm just saying the Bible teaches that he has allowed evil for his own purposes. He's allowed darkness to enter the world, which means that darkness is present in human hearts. And this is what so many are trying to deny. Modern orthodoxy says that there are some bad apples in the bunch, but for the most part, people are good. People are basically good, but Paul comes from the perspective that everyone is in darkness unless they've been called out of darkness by Jesus. So this has been the premise of the book of Ephesians from the beginning. You remember back in chapter 2 where he says that they had been dead in their trespasses and sins until God made them alive. They were in darkness until God made them alive in Christ and they came into the light. And this is exactly what verse 14 is telling us, where he quotes what most people think is a hymn that they sang. Verse 14, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So he's equating darkness with death, spiritual death, of course. So why is he telling us this? So he knows that the world of darkness is a strong temptation for his readers, and it is a strong temptation for us. Does that sound like a weird statement? That we would be drawn to the darkness? Why would we be drawn to the darkness? Well, let's define what darkness is. That's what we have to do. If we're going to understand darkness, we've got to define what the Bible is talking about when it talks about darkness. In his book, Habits of the Heart, Robert Bellah, who's not a professing Christian to my knowledge, but he's a philosopher. He's retired now. He's not gone yet, but he's in his 80s. He sums up what is the essence of Western culture with the phrase expressive individualism. This is how he sums up all of Western secular culture, expressive individualism. He says this, our culture does not believe we learn or become who we are by sublimating our individual needs for those of the community or family. What is he saying there? In other words, we can't be fulfilled or realize our potential through other people or by being part of a community. Rather, he says, each person has a unique core of feeling and intuition that should unfold or be expressed if individuality or identity is to be realized. Do you see what he's saying? It's not just that people are self-centered, which is what he's declaring about Western secular culture. It's not just that they're self-centered. It's that this is actually encouraged because it is in yourself that you realize who you are and what your potential is. This is modern day orthodoxy. This is what is out there everywhere. So what we have here is that biblical Christianity and modern Western secularism are exactly opposites. They're completely opposites. The Apostle John in his first epistle says this. This is 1 John 2:16. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. So what Western secular culture has done is to turn this on its head and say that the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and your pride should be what drives you, because it's in these things that you will find your own fulfillment. Look inside. So what does that look like? Well, truth be told, it feels good to follow your own desires. I like it until I don't. It feels good to try to fulfill myself. It feels good when I am praised because of how wonderful I've done something. It feels good when it's about me and I'm the center of attention and people are noticing me. It feels a lot like light because it promises so much. It promises to give you a fulfilled life. But the question is, does it? So Paul has just gotten done in the previous passage in verse 3 here in chapter 5 to tell everyone to run from sexual immorality. We talked about that last week. This is one of those areas that has seeming brightness all around it. It just feels right in the moment. But is it? Is it bright? When we apply Western secular cultural ideal to sex, we get what we may not have bargained for. Because if it's about my fulfillment, then my sexual partner is there to fulfill me, which means I'm not actually loving them, I'm using them. And so the natural outgrowth of this is that when they don't fulfill me anymore, then I'm done with them. I've got to find someone else who will fulfill me. So our relationships are not relationships of love, but of using people for what I need from them in my life. And the Bible calls this darkness. Putting myself over everyone. And we have proof that it's not working. And as Christine Emba, as I've quoted her before in her book, Rethinking Sex, there are myriad of testimonies of the emptiness of this way of approaching sex. We could apply this to other areas that we struggle with as well. Think about fame. As a culture, we do worship at the altar of celebrity. Now with YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and others, you have thousands of people that are trying to be influencers and are trying to be known. Why? Because fame looks appealing. We'll get to money in a minute, but fame looks appealing. It seems to give status and it opens all kinds of doors. But more than that, it puts you square in the middle of your own world with adoring fans that worship you. Who doesn't want that? If my wife would just worship me a little bit more, life would be grand. Teasing, it's a joke. Okay. I saw in an interview with former President Bill Clinton, who talked about the perks of being president. And he said he loved every minute of it. Of course you would love every minute of the perks of being president. When the president of the United States walks into a room, everything stops and they become the complete center of attention. Everything they say or do or want to do has an entire staff to make it happen. You breathe something and it happens. You can do whatever you want and everyone around you fawns over you. And that's basically what happens with fame of any kind. People worship you, but there is a downside to fame. Your expectations grow and you believe your own press, and soon you don't think you can do any wrong and you become a god unto yourself, expecting everyone to worship you. And then you begin to opinionate on all kinds of things you don't know anything about, and you expect everyone to listen to you because, after all, you're famous. And what you have to say is important. But we were never created to be worshiped. It doesn't really work. And the Bible calls that darkness. But then what comes with fame usually is money, right? Who doesn't dream about what you could do with lots of money? It feels really, really good. The money and fame bring power and control over lots of things, and all of this feels really good. It makes your life easier. You can afford all of the luxuries and all of the good things in life. This fits perfectly with the Western secular ideal. It feels like light. You can avoid all kinds of suffering because that's one category that Western secular culture doesn't have. It doesn't have a category for suffering. And there's lots of suffering in the world, but you can throw money at a lot of things like that. See, the truth is, though, that it becomes slavery. It becomes a slave master that never fulfills. It becomes what you think about and what you dream about and what you plan for. And soon it consumes your soul because it will never be enough. We could talk about darkness in the church. When I think that my idea is the best one and the right one, when I get offended over a small slight, when I look at the church with a consumer mentality and think they are here to serve me. After all, I give my money, and on and on and on it goes, a self-centered approach to church. I need to be fed. I need to be fed. I'm not being fed. I'm not this. I'm not that. Don't have enough friends. It's all about me. And the Bible calls it darkness. That's what darkness is. I think we need to rethink what is darkness and what is light. Paul has something to say here to the Ephesians about being deceived by these things. This is a strong statement in verse 6. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. The ultimate darkness is that we have Jesus before us, like the Israelites did. And he's saying, I am the light of the world. And we don't see him. And so these are sobering words for those who reject the light. So there is such a thing as darkness. And we all have massive blind spots about its effects in our lives. We often live like they did in the movie The Matrix, in a false world. And I wonder if in all of the quest to be fulfilled, whether it's actually working, and I suspect it's not. Question is, will you be willing for the light to shine in on your darkness? So point number 2, why walking in the light is better. Paul defines what the light looks like in verse 9. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. Those 3 words right there. Impress you with my Greek skills. Agathosune is the one for goodness and generosity. Those are the 2 main concepts in that word. The next one, which is translated right, is justice, fairness, and righteousness. And the third one, which is defined as true, is truthfulness, dependability, uprightness. So it reminded me for some reason of Paul's prescription for peace in the book of Philippians. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Here's why walking in the light is better. Because walking in the light is the same thing as what the Bible describes as walking in love. When you walk in love, everyone around you flourishes. You're not using them, you're serving them. When you walk in love, people around you get better. They are drawn to you, are encouraged to do the same thing, to lay down their lives for others in sacrificial love as well. To walk in love is a better way. It's a joyful way. But there's another reason why walking in the light is better. It's much more powerful. It's much, much more powerful than the darkness. That's what it says here in verses 11 to 13. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them, for it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. When you walk into a dark room with a flashlight, the darkness disappears because the light is more powerful than the darkness. Darkness is really the absence of light, right? So there's a couple of things here in these couple of verses. In verse 12, it tells us that it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But verse 11 has just told us to expose the darkness. Which one is it? Do I expose it and say it? Or is it shameful for me to even say it? Are you confused by that? There's kind of this it almost seems opposite. Well, I think that what Paul is telling us here is that conversation is powerful. He's already told us back in verse 4 when he talked to us about crude joking. What he's saying is that conversation can actually lead you into sin, especially when you're exposing deeds of darkness, prayer requests, right? Exposing deeds of darkness. We need to pray for so-and-so. Have you heard what they're involved in? It can involve gossip, right? That could lead you, conversation could lead you into sin, but it can also lead you into sexual sin, especially if someone is describing what happened in detail. So this is something that we always need to be careful of. There's lots of room. Our tongues are loose ships, or loose, whatever James says. And I'm trying to quote it and I don't have it. But it's dangerous. The sins of the tongue. But verse 11 tells us to expose the darkness. Does that mean that we walk around exposing everyone else's darkness? Well, I don't think so. See, I think this is in the context of the power of the light. Writer Marva Dawn, great author, tells how the pursuit of what is right exposes what is wrong. This is what she says. The playwright president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, was once asked why the Velvet Revolution against the communists in the former Czechoslovakia was successfully nonviolent. Havel answered somewhat like this. We had our parallel society, and in that parallel society, we wrote our plays and sang our songs and read our poems until we knew the truth so well that we could go out to the streets of Prague and say, we don't believe your lies anymore, and communism had to fall. So I guess the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we find the true light that exposes darkness? Because according to verse 9, what is good and right and true is actually a fruit. It's a fruit of something else. So let me quote the hymn again in verse 14. Awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Christ, I am the light of the world. See, it's teaching us that Jesus is the light, but he's not just any ordinary light. He is the light. He is the one from whom all other lights are derived. There is no light without him. If his light extinguished, all light would extinguish. There would be no light. He is the light of the world. It's not an accident that there's an article in front of light, the light. Can I emphasize that enough? The Apostle John in his gospel tells about Jesus. John 1:9, the true light which gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. When Jesus stood up in the temple and said, I am the light of the world, no one knew him. Some of them ignored him, surely. They blew him off. But the religious leaders felt threatened by him and were looking for their opportunity to do away with him. See, the conniving starts, the light gets exposed, I get exposed, and the excuses begin, or the anger begins. How dare you say that to me? I'm not like that. This is not who I really am. I may have done that, but that's not really me. And the light begins, and it begins to shine, and we begin all the excuses. We're the Teflon Don. It bounces off of us. We make excuses. We shift the blame to someone else. We talk about somebody else. This is what we do. We don't like the light. We don't like it. The world didn't want to know his light. It's because it's too bright. So do you want your thoughts and attitudes and motives and actions exposed to the light? Would you like them to come out? Most people don't. And then people hate that Jesus is the only light. They hate that. Surely there are many lights, but that's not the biblical answer. So this idea of Jesus being the light of the world is too much for most people, so they reject Jesus. In his commentary on the Gospel of John, N.T. Wright says this: a friend of mine described the reaction when he went home as a young teenager and announced to his mother that he'd become a Christian. Alarmed, she thought he'd joined some kind of cult. They've brainwashed you, she said. He was ready with the right answer. If you'd seen what was in my brain, he replied, you'd realize it needed washing. Of course, he hadn't been brainwashed. In fact, again and again, and this was certainly the case with my friend, when people bring their lives, their outer lives and inner lives into the light of Jesus the Messiah, things begin to become clear. If anything, it's our surrounding culture that brainwashes us, persuading us in 1,000 subtle ways that the present world is the only one there is. This is seldom argued. Rather, a mood is created in which it seems so much easier to go with the flow. That's what happens in brainwashing. What the gospel does is to administer a sharp jolt, to shine a bright light, to kickstart the brain and the moral sensibility into working properly for the first time. This is what Jesus came to do for us, brothers and sisters. And talk about shocking. He had to die the most hard and cruel death that this planet has ever invented. Days of torture without being able to breathe. Why would it have to be so? See, this is what people don't like. It's because our level of darkness is so deep that only the Son of God and his death for us could actually pay for it. The creator of all that is, the Lord of all things, loved us so much that he was willing to pay that penalty that we deserve. He took our guilt. He took our shame. He took all of our darkness, all the things we're trying to hide. Even now, he took all of those things. He's shown his light on those things, and he's made us new creatures that now have the ability to do right, to think rightly, to live in goodness, truth, righteousness, and love. Why wouldn't we let him expose our darkness? Will it be painful? Yes. Will it bring healing? Absolutely. Absolutely. He brings healing and love and joy and freedom from ourselves. Self-focus brings darkness. Jesus brings light. That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.